anything online?
So Tanya will not be here, so everyone that's going to be here is here. Started the webinar.
All right, let's call this meeting of the Tumwater Tree Board to Monday, November 13th, 2023 to order. Roll call. You just want to go around to the room. Mike, you want to start?
Mike Jackson.
Cody Koval.
Trent Grantham.
Brent Chapman.
Hannah Ullman.
Jim Sedor.
Amita Devrapjan.
Tanya is excused. Any changes to the agenda tonight?
Almost had one with the city administrator asking to be on the agenda, but she'll be here next month.
Okay.
Scared her off, huh?
Asked, did I think that she was going to be here today? No.
That's the new city manager?
Yep.
Oh. Okay, no meeting minutes to approve. Any member reports from the tree board? No? Coordinators report.
In terms of the wildland urban interface, City of Tumwater, mostly Brad, and members of my department, drafted a letter and gave that letter to the Association for Washington Cities. The Association for Washington Cities then put that on their letterhead, sent it to the State Building Code Council, and we apparently have been having Brad and Al, our building manager, forget his title at the moment, but building inspector, chief building inspector, have been having conversations with the Building Code Council to try to address some of the concerns that we have about the wildland urban interface, the way that it's written now. Apparently on Friday, there is a State Building Code Council meeting where maybe some action will be taken. We still have until March for that to be final, and I know a lot of other cities are also talking about maybe getting involved in the legislative session to improve that code so that it's workable and makes sense for Western Washington as well.
Did you clarify by the end of March, because the session is over in March? Is there an opportunity for this session or the following one?
This session.
Okay.
Try to get in there as quickly as possible is my understanding. I know Olympia has been the loudest about that. Tumwater is trying to help with the Association of Washington Cities as much as possible. Like I said, we drafted the letter.
Has there been some sort of summary, I guess you say, environmental impact statement on if this legislation, if this change occurs?
The AWC letter has a lot of those. It also includes some things that aren't environmental, like it says that it's optional here and mandatory there for the same thing, because that happened in the code in a couple of different places. I have, and Brad produced a memo for the tree board that got sent out a number of months ago at this point, with his synopsis from building and planning, and then my department put out a memo, which I didn't share with you, but I can, about the ways in which it doesn't work for water resources, including the amount of irrigation that would be required to keep everything irrigated all the time, stormwater inconsistencies, stream temperature inconsistencies. I can give that to the tree board if you all would like.
Okay.
But still just from staff perspective, so it's not like a larger agency looking into and doing a more in-depth analysis, but start.
My understanding, well, can you clarify? Will this proposed change in the law be retroactive, or all future construction must comply, or are we going to have to cut down a bunch of trees?
Future construction and new building permits, which includes decks and smaller building permits. Technically, if our inspectors are at a property and they find that it's not in compliance, they can require compliance. But our inspectors are doing a lot every day, and I don't expect that they would be carving out time for that as opposed to other things.
So if this goes through, people will be required to remove or thin trees on their existing property, even though they haven't made any changes to their property.
the way that it's written right now, in a perfect world, yes, but it's subject to someone being asked to do that. We're trying to not have that part.
Sure.
So new construction, new building permits, but it's all being negotiated, or talked about, discussed in meetings that I'm not at. But I have faith that our staff is pushing for the right things.
Thank you.
As a result of that, our codes, the 3 sections of code that we were working on, are still on hold until we get that final language. We don't want to try to push something forward that then we can't do. So thank you for your patience with that. Nobody likes how long this is taking, but that's a more efficient way to go about it.
And the final language is
March 15th, it should be done.
March, and that's, by final language, you mean this will become law?
Yes, we will need to pass an ordinance adopting it by that same deadline. So hopefully it's clarified before then. So I also wanted to give you all an update on, next month's meeting, we'll have the meeting with the directors and other staff to go over the progress on the urban forestry management plan. Here, because I want to give you an update on the inventory as well. Load here. The consultants have inspected and documented 1,508 trees at city buildings and facilities and collected data on an additional 545 trees and 40 plots using sampling methods. So those sampling sites are places like Tumwater Hill Park and Pioneer Park, and just there's not enough time to count every single tree, unfortunately. So they use sampling methods. They'll be inferring from that for the iTree. We're still working on the methodology for that so that we can have a confidence in the iTree analysis for some of the larger plots. I started ground truthing the 2018 street tree inventory this morning. And I have a plan to use volunteers to assist with the ground truthing. I have here sign up sheet if anyone wants to sign up, but we'll be putting it out further. To do a decentralized practice, as I was doing it today, I realized that we're prioritizing cleaning up the places that the city maintains because the inventory is to help us budget for our maintenance. So I have those areas, and I'm trying to break it down by like 30 minutes to an hour of someone's time. They can tell me how much they have. They can sign onto this on their phone, which I'll go into in a moment, and simply walk along the sidewalk. And if there's a gray dot that's next to them that doesn't have a tree, I'll have a data sheet for them to fill out. It says, okay, click on a tree number or a tree. So let's say that works better in my head. So say they're on this street and they're at this tree on the sidewalk, but the tree is not there. They can then put on a piece of paper that I'll give them the site ID 2965. Tree has been removed. If it's been replaced with a different tree, this one doesn't have the species associated. I don't expect volunteers to be able to identify trees this time of year. I would like to, but I can't expect that from everyone. And I'll have resources available for them to help if they want to. But they would just simply check off on a sheet, just write down the number, removed, and then we'll clean up the data from there. If people are ambitious and they want to take DBH measurements that aren't there, I have tapes and they can go out and do that. That's the plan so far. This time of year, I figured trying to produce one big volunteer event and then move them all over the city to get all of them, that the weather probably wasn't going to be well suited for that, and maybe people would do this in their own time, and I can give them training on how to sign in or get them an account on TreeKeeper, and they can go do that between now and when we need to have the data.
So it sounds like more like just checking if the tree's there, nothing more elaborate, like the condition of the tree. It'd be interesting to know if the condition improved or got worse from 2018.
If I'll have a space on the data sheet for someone to write notes. So like today, when I was looking on Second, I noticed one tree that like the bark is kind of like split in half. It was in great condition before, so I'm not a forester. I'm not a not trained in this, so I was just like, maybe needs care. Or if the sidewalk hadn't been previously noted, there's a section for notes on that data sheet where someone can mark that, but the average person outside of this room probably won't be able to have better quality data, unfortunately. And this is like prioritizing this for the inclusion for the street tree and the city inventory. That's not to say that we won't continue to look at other street trees that aren't maintained by the city and won't try to make that data better. Not in this particular go.
If we get an urban forester, that might be something that person could work on.
That's why I'm collecting all of these data points.
The deadline for this is pretty short, isn't it?
Yeah, so in the timeline for the consultant to have all of the inventory data so that they can then move on to the report stage is like second week of December. So there won't be a lot of time. I talked to our communications department this morning, and we'll be getting the word out, especially to the census tract that is has a higher environmental health disparity score. So we'll be trying to recruit whoever. I'll be reaching out to the list of stakeholders from our tree codes, you all, TCATS tree group, some other nonprofit tree groups that I know of, and that particular neighborhood to try and get people involved.
And can people say, well, I'd like to do this neighborhood?
They can go above and beyond and work on neighborhoods if they want. My priority is to get the parts that we maintain as a city.
Do you have a list that you'll give to individuals, or?
I have a list that people can sign up for that have a associated amount of time it would take. And I broke down like Little Rock Road, like from Tumwater Boulevard to Trosper, there are almost 500 street trees. So I don't expect any one person to be like game for that. So I broke it into like 0.4 mile tracks that would take 45 minutes or so. And on some streets that are busy, I broke it up one side of the street versus another so that I don't even have to have that volunteer crossing the busy street. There are liability risks associated with that. And I am going to be asking them to use their own personal cell phone and look at it while they're walking, and that's already a trip hazard. So trying to have it so that it's not an overwhelming amount of time. Someone could walk in their own neighborhood and gather that data, or in the places where we really need it. And I think it's like 12 hours total of work to get that. Finish that task for the street trees that the city maintains, and then we can continue this on forever and just have an ongoing citizen science thing going on. If any tree board members would like to sign up for any section, I have it here. You are the first people getting the opportunity. You all would have really great notes for exactly what kind of trees they are and if there are any health issues above and beyond, but there is no pressure for you to do this.
I assume they're all Monday through Friday.
This is whenever you want. So that's part of the whole decentralized thing, is whenever it's beautiful outside, you can go. Whenever it works for you, you can go. And
we'll have your number when we get stuck.
And if it's tree ID, I may or may not be able to.
I meant more the technical part for myself.
So there's that. This is Treekeeper. This is the software that our consultants are using to track their data collection. So let me go to right where we are. For instance, and these will not be unassigned. These will have data. So we're right here. There's a tree right there. Let's see. The Japanese maple. And I can tell you that it's in poor structure. It needs a routine prune, but overall in good condition. I have its DBH, the number of stems, the zone, so that we can calculate that with the tree canopy goals that we have for the different zones of the city. So every city property, they have gone and done this. If it's not a big natural area, they've gone tree to tree to tree and collected this. If it's a natural area, sampling plots. But we have all of this information, and they'll be using that to have that tree maintenance plan, timing, and budget requests. Adequate funding to properly care for our urban forest that the city owns.
So how are these trees put into Treekeeper?
So the consultants have, I can edit stuff in here, but I don't want to give every volunteer that. So they can delete everything. They have their own system that's kind of a backdoor in here, where they're acting on a tablet and walking around. And you can also edit data in Treekeeper, but they have something called Rover that they've been using. And I have two other quick updates. Tree City USA, I'll be putting that information into the state and Arbor Day Foundation. It's due December 1st, so I've been collecting that information from our operations, parks, and street tree folks. Putting that out there. We're shooting to have another year of Tree City USA. And I know Jim has expressed interest, but I haven't opened it up to the group. Olympia Ecosystems has a restoration site in Tumwater. They've invited us for a tour. Friday is a day that's available. If anyone wants to go, let me know and we can figure out a time. I'm otherwise just going to be ground truthing around the streets of Tumwater. So if you would like to visit the Deschutes River Preserve restoration site, I know it's Oregon spotted frog habitat restoration, which doesn't have a lot of trees, but it's still nature and habitat, so maybe you're interested.
I can go back to the inventory, one more issue. Yeah, is this linked now to the city staff? So when they remove a tree or plant a tree, it will be put into the inventory? So
we don't have to do this again? Yeah, I'm working on that with our GIS staff. When the Urban Forestry Management Plan was passed, that was an action. And then we went through, we have been going through a transition of some of the software that we use as a city, that we use for accounting, our asset inventory, invoicing, lots of different things. And our work order system for our staff doesn't currently talk to it, but would with this new version that we're having in the future. So there was a bit of a delay, like, why spend all this energy to do this when we're going to have to do it again in 2 years? I think I've made the case that this is a lot more energy to go visit every tree and make sure it's there or not. So we're working on setting that up so that we don't have to do this again unless we want to update the data and check on the health of the trees, not so much not know where the trees have been removed or not. And I did download all of our tree removal exemption permits, and I have all that data for the neighborhoods, and that's something that I won't be asking volunteers to because it's like 1 or 2, maybe max 10 per neighborhood. I'm just going to drive around and get that, make sure that replace either the same or a different kind. And maple, I'll get down to maple. I won't know the cultivar or anything like that, but.
Does the inventory in this scenario have a field for date planted?
There's date collection. There's not one for date planted, no.
An opportunity in the future with, particularly with the city work, when the city plants trees, to note the date, and then it would be there for future reference. Maybe it could be a suggestion in the notes section.
And again, these trees on that list are only the ones that the city maintains.
I'm trying to prioritize that since we only have a couple weeks to get that information, which I will admit, I've been very intimidated by this task. And it was only maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago that I got access to Treekeeper to give to volunteers, to start understanding how I would even mobilize the volunteers. So my anxiety crippled me a little bit in getting this out sooner. But I walked it today and figured it out and have a path forward, and we'll get what we really need for the inventory maintenance plan, and we'll continue forward from there to make sure that all of the data is accurate and quality.
Future, would you like reach out to HOAs or somebody like that to collect free tree data?
I could ask them to volunteer, but I wouldn't expect them to necessarily do it. We have the permits. So in some neighborhoods, I know that they removed 4 crimson maples. I don't know which one, because it's like a neighborhood-wide permit. So perhaps they would have that, and that would be a faster way. I will be reaching out to HOAs as part of the call for volunteers too, but really trying to prioritize these ones if we can.
Because the HOAs are required to take care of their own street trees anyway.
Yeah. That's my update. There are no members of the public, virtually.
Okay, we jump right into the intern street tree review project.
This is Amita. They are my intern now and in the past, and they're going to talk to us about a past project that they did. So I'll give the floor to you. Yeah, we can try. Thanks for your patience while we figure out if we can put their screen up. If not, I have reference list, and I have this. And I also attached the one paper that was especially useful, the shorter version. Okay, then if you want to person the mouse, we'll scroll through. And you can sit, you can stand whenever you prefer. Well, however it's sent here. We generally sit. You might need to speak up a little bit.
She have a microphone.
I'm actually going to move the mic closer. No.
Here for now. Right, so I guess I'll start by just kind of talking about what my research was for and how I expected I should go about it and how I wanted it to generally be used. So that kind of directed my methods. Yeah, so this research was basically while I believe the street tree ordinances was going through. I'm not sure if that's still something that's happening. Okay. But basically the goal of this was to act as supplemental research or background research into the effects of climate change in the Puget Sound region, or more generally, the Pacific Northwest, though I tried to get in as close as I could with the studies, and see how the bioclimatic changes that are predicted to occur within this century, how that would impact the trees here, especially the native trees and the ones that were in the street plan approved tree list. That's what it was.
It's the draft approved street tree list, so it's an improvement upon what we currently still have, but to make sure that it was even better when we adopted it in the future.
So my initial research was based on the fact that cities are beginning to recognize the importance of urban forests and street trees in enhancing general quality of life, but specifically as a way to combat and adapt to climate change. It plays an important role that I will go over a little bit more in this presentation, but generally, the resilience of urban forests and their ecosystem benefits right now are already being threatened by the impact of climate change, and we predict that based on the studies that I have read and several resources from the Washington State Department, these impacts will get worse over time. And so it is crucial at this moment to take action and start on movement in climate adaptation using street trees and urban forests. So I started my research just by looking at the broad bioclimatic conditions of the Puget Sound region. So the Puget Sound region has been warming at a rate of about 0.2 degrees Fahrenheit per decade since 1960, and the average temperature is projected to increase by 5 degrees Fahrenheit under a low climate change scenario. It goes by as much as 8.6 degrees Fahrenheit under a high climate change scenario by the end of the century. The average number of days greater than 86 degrees Fahrenheit determines heat zones. So the Puget Sound region is historically in heat zone 2, which is 1 to 7 days exceeding 30 degrees Celsius, which is 86 degrees Fahrenheit. Under the intermediate climate change scenario, the heat zone is projected to stay in heat zone 2 by 2039 and shift to heat zone 3, 7 to 14 days exceeding 30 degrees Celsius by 2040 to 2069, remaining all the way until 2099. Under the high climate change scenario, the heat zone is projected to shift to zone 3 by 2039, zone 4, which is 14 to 30 days exceeding 30 degrees Celsius, by 2040 to 2069. And it will eventually reach zone 6, which is 45 to 60 days exceeding 30 degrees Celsius by 2070 through 2099. The Puget Sound region is historically in hardiness zone 8, at least from what my research gathered, which should be around negative 12.2 degrees Celsius to negative 6.7 degrees Celsius. Under a low climate change scenario, the hardiness zone is projected to stay in zone 8A to 8B in the Puget Sound region by 2039. It will then shift over time to zone 9 by 2040 to 2069. Under the high climate change scenario, the hardiness zone is projected to shift completely by zone 9 to 2039 and remain in zone 9 throughout 2099. So generally, these results imply that less hardy species may be able to grow in the region, and they could drastically alter the ecological dynamics already present in urban forests here. Expanding on that possibility, I looked into a report titled Assessing the Impact of Climate Change on Urban Forests. Share that one if preferred, or, okay. Thank you. It's titled Assessing the Impact of Climate Change on Urban Forests in the Puget Sound region, Climate Suitability Analysis for Tree Species. I think I'm going to go to that one in a little bit, but fine here. Okay. This report assessed the impact of climate change on habitat suitability and seed transfer zones of 3 tree species native to the Puget Sound region: Western red cedar, Western hemlock, and Douglas fir, which were said to be commonly selected for urban forest restoration. The report states that the range of these species in the Puget Sound are likely to continue to provide climate conditions that are suitable for these species by the end of the century. However, when individual seed transfer zones of these species are considered separately, the bioclimatic envelope that is matching the current seed zones in the Puget Sound is likely to disappear by the end of the century. Quote, the bioclimatic conditions that make up the current seed transfer zones around the Puget Sound for Western red cedar, Western hemlock, and Douglas fir are likely to diminish, shift further northwest towards Canadian islands, or disappear by the end of the century. So with the predicted novel bioclimatic conditions that came from the study, the authors suggest increasing the diversity of seed sources that include current seed zones as well as future seed zones, as it may enhance and ensure the probability of successful reforestation and restoration of Western red cedar and other native tree species in the region. Going back to the climatic conditions, precipitation in the region has been increasing by 0.49 inches per decade since 1960, and is projected to increase by 2.1 to 3.2 inches under both low and high climate change scenarios by the end of the century in the winter, spring, and fall seasons. It is actually predicted to decrease in the summer by as much as 0.6 inches. In a thesis report titled An Evaluation of Potential Policy Tools and Frameworks for Urban Tree Canopy Cover Management in North Vancouver, the author pulls on research to show that urban trees and forest canopy cover has a great capacity for rainfall retention and the ability to influence the lag time, velocity, and peak flows of stormwater runoff. It was found that on average in coastal Vancouver, the rainfall interception rate of Douglas firs was 49.1% and western red cedars was 60.9%. The significant proportions of rainfall that are captured and evaporated rather than contributing to urban storm flows have significant implications on flood protections in urban environments. The additional utilities provided by urban forests are also compromised as canopy cover decreases, which there has been a trend to in Washington state. To this point, the author emphasizes the notable advantages of planting large, longer-lived trees, as it reduces the number of trees requiring planting and removal at the end of its lifespan, as well as lowering the long-term costs and fuel consumption required of maintenance. Distinctions between deciduous and evergreen trees are also important to recognize. This is because evergreen trees keep their foliage year-round, and that means they have a greater ability to attenuate rainfall throughout the year. Aside from the direct impact of climate change, there are a lot of smaller impacts that will be felt in urban environments that come as just an indirect byproduct. This, mainly in my research, included insect outbreaks and pests. So scientists have long documented that arthropod pests are actually more abundant on urban trees than in rural trees. And there is research supporting the idea that urban heat may explain this effect. So a research article titled Urban Warming Drives Insect Pest Abundance on Street Trees found evidence that scale insects, I'm not quite sure how to say it, P. quercifex, their populations may be locally adapted or individuals have acclimatized to the temperature of urban habitat patches in which they reside. They observed this effect over a temperature gradient common in many urban heat islands, indicating that urban warming poses a broad and immediate threat to urban trees and the services they provide, including cooling and carbon sequestration. The adaptation or acclimatization of herbivorous pests to warm environments may represent an ecological tipping point, after which arthropod pests can overwhelm plant defenses and escape natural enemy control. Furthermore, temperature increases of similar magnitude are predicted under global climate change. If rising global temperatures trigger an herbivore response similar to the ones observed in the study, then both urban and rural trees may be threatened by greatly increased herbivory in the future. This is by several orders of magnitude type of threat. So focusing in a little bit more on the main goal of my studying and research, I wanted to come up with something that was usable by the city. And so my main resource was actually the tree assessment, tree species vulnerability assessment. Basically, it's a list that goes over a lot of different conditions and compiles them through many different research articles, studies. And my goal was basically to use the trees on the list of the approved street tree draft and to cross-compare them to this assessment to make a usable spreadsheet assessing the vulnerability of trees on the approved street tree list, or draft. So as a kind of summary for this assessment in general, this one is not mine, I have a table later on, but for the assessment itself, it basically summarizes climate change projections for the Puget Sound region and provides an assessment of tree species vulnerability in the region. It used projected shifts in plant hardiness and heat zones that aligned with the ones that I had stated previously. It compiled research of how species of interest are projected to tolerate future conditions while assessing the adaptability of planted trees to stressors such as drought, flooding, wind damage, and air pollution, as well as environmental conditions such as shade, soils, and restricted rooting. Some summarized results state, of the evaluated tree species, 27% received a high adaptability score, 59% received a medium adaptability score, and 14% received a low adaptability score. So considering heat zones only, the majority of tree species fell into the low to moderate vulnerability category, followed by low vulnerability and moderate vulnerability. These ratings remain the same between low and high climate change projections because all assessed tree species are considered suitable under the heat zone projections through the end of the century. Common species with low to low moderate vulnerability, considering just heat zones, include red maple, Norway maple, crabapple, Japanese maple, cherry plum, Japanese cherry, Midland hawthorn, Callery pear, red oak, Japanese snowbell, and Kosa dogwood. Considering both heat and hardiness zones, the majority of tree species assessed fall into moderate-high vulnerability category, 39%, followed by low moderate, 20%, moderate, 18%, low, 13%, and high, 9%. The vulnerability ratings are the same between the low and high climate change scenarios because, again, same throughout the end of the century. So common species with low to low moderate vulnerability, considering both heat and hardiness zones, include red maple, Norway maple, cherry plum, Callery pear, big leaf maple, scarlet oak, green ash, American hornbeam, and European hornbeam. Common species with moderate high to high vulnerability, considering heat and hardiness zones, include crabapple, Japanese maple, Japanese cherry, paper bark maple, red oak, Japanese snowbell, silver birch, katsura tree, rowan, and common hawthorn. It is notable to say that of these tree species, only big leaf maple is native to the Pacific Northwest, and this study wanted to emphasize that a lot of the trees that they had found and were looking at for street trees were not native and were in fact from different countries even. The researchers of the study recommended that people working in policy and reading this should keep in mind that the tree species vulnerability list is not exactly a planting list. And it should be combined with knowledge of the region itself, as well as additional factors of consideration, such as allergenicity, wildlife, and cultural values. As such, my list that I made is meant to be supporting research, but not to be relied on in totality. Context of the other resources I've found is important, and from reading and working on this, my recommendation is to use this in congruence with information from local climate experts as well as studies of local area. Is there anything in particular you would like me to go over with this that would be of interest?
Were there any that stood out that, I know we have it sounds like maples are not very long-lived when it comes to moving forward, and we've got a lot of maples planted around the city, so.
Yeah.
Is there something that, like, what's the best species as far as like adaptability?
Yeah, so the kind of best species were the ones that were at the heat and hardiness where they were in low vulnerability. They do include red maple. So there are a couple maples in here that are predicted to be tolerant of high heat and like hardiness zones. So that's like the red maple, Norway maple, big leaf maple, and those are the ones that supposedly are the most suitable. The ones that I found interesting, I could say, were western red cedar. I think a lot of the native trees are showing signs of struggle from what I have read, and a lot of the ones that are being used for reforestation, as well as like, you know, the Douglas fir, check which one there. The western hemlock as well, those have a lot of shifts in, you know, where their seed envelopes will be. And that combined with some of the vulnerability on this list means that there will be a lot of change in general climate as well as in street tree usage of a lot of native trees.
This list, this draft street tree list that's before you now with Emissions Research for information. This is we finally have some native trees on this list, but they're for landscaped areas only, so like not immediately next to sidewalk, but for unimproved right-of-way, a little further away. So they're at least on there for that. But like right now, we have 0 native trees on our approved street tree list.
Just plant a bunch of big leaf maple as long as.
Well, I know Seattle does vine maple. That's one of their approved street tree, but I know that it doesn't always love being in full sun.
Right.
So if I understand you correctly, I used to work in reforestation. And of course, you're talking 60 to 120 years when a tree matures. And the state is divided into seed zones that you refer to. Lots and lots of seed zones, even some of them involving aspect. So we were very careful in reforestation to try to plant seed from the area in which we wanted seed to come from the site where the trees were going to be planted. And it sounds like your research is suggesting that we not do that any longer, that in fact we find seed sources that are under more stress, higher temperatures, lower precipitation, and use those seeds to reforest the native forests, because in the future they'll need to have these other genetic characteristics in order to survive the gradual climate change, particularly if they're going to live 120 years before they mature, before they're harvested. So, and most of the trees you were talking, well, my understanding is that, I heard this from a speaker a couple months ago, of course, plants and animals are significantly affected by extremes, not averages. So in your research, did you see anything related to climate change that might indicate more radical extremes in temperature and precipitation? For example, you said, you know, people are saying, well, the temperature is going to go up on the average a couple degrees, but we have had 108-degree days in June here, which is an extreme. Now, is that going to be 120-degree extremes every 50 years, which may radically affect some of the native trees, or not only the natives, but the ornamentals that we've planted in our cities? Is there any information? And in what you think about heat sinks in the urban environment in particular, insect changes in their habits based upon increased temperature and increased drought. It's challenging to say, well, you know, you really ought to be looking at Northern California trees to plant in the Pacific Northwest, because that's the climate we're going to have 50, 60 years from now. Am I understanding you correctly in that regard?
I think, yeah, so what I understood from the research is that they are suggesting a mix, so a diversity of basically seeds from different seed lots. But yeah, so when it comes to, I think, extremes, I don't think a lot of the studies I looked into accounted for that, except for, I think in pests was one thing where high extremes of temperature can really increase the pest population. And because the tree is already stressed, you know, low water in the summer, like the average amount of rain decreasing, that for sure is something that will like keep getting worse whenever there is an extreme. In general, I believe the research I looked at took all the stuff from the past, like 1960, around somewhere there, wherever we had like reliable data, and looked at, you know, all the ups and downs, and then averaged it, and then they took that average, and then they just applied it for the future. But yeah, I am not 100% sure what would happen with that, but that is really interesting, and I really appreciate you asking that.
For the extremes, there's a lower level of certainty amongst scientists to predict those, so there's a greater level of certainty for providing the averages.
But it's, as this speaker said, you know, it's the extremes that kill us. It's not usually the averages. So, you know, how can we plan for that?
We do know that the global average temperature, anything above 1.5, has more death and destruction, and once we get above 2, that it's significantly more, and those are averages, but they would contain the heat waves and extremes that are experienced all over the world.
The you know, peculiar thing about the Pacific Northwest climate is the summer drought. You know, we get lots of precipitation on average in the year, but we have these 90, 120 day droughts that happen in the summer, which if those are going to be more severe, regardless of how much rain we get in December, if we don't get any from May to October, that's the problem in terms of plant survivability. We're fortunate here to have mountains so that we have runoff and snow melt that extends our ability to irrigate. But if we reduce our snow loads in the mountains so that we have less water to spread around in a longer drought period with higher extremes of temperature, it's going to be very challenging for the plants to adapt, I guess I would say. Or, yes, do we really make a priority on xerophilic trees that can survive under extended drought periods?
It's not red maple.
Not red maple, and probably
It's
not
fascinating that was one of the
western red.
more tolerant plants, but when you throw in the precipitation factor, I mean, unless it's irrigated all summer long.
Right.
Yeah.
So we had red maples in Florida.
Which is, you know, well, the challenge of this.
It was extremes of heat and lots of precipitation, but maybe not drought.
You know, deciduous with their broad leaves in the summer is the time when they need lots of moisture. Conifers, you know, they've got stomata, they've got, you know, wax coatings and all kinds of stuff.
Left leaf surface.
Yeah. So they can, which is suggested as to why we have a conifer forest here rather than a deciduous forest. Right. But it you know, it's going to be this challenge between, promoting natives versus promoting species that'll be around 100 years from now, is kind of a shift
Absolutely.
in landscape planning.
I'd just like to say on the Capitol campus, we're employing multiple strategies. I think that's the thing that really, I mean, there was so much that resonated with me. Thanks for your research, but the importance of having diversity of things that are going to be tolerant of various conditions. So you're not putting all your eggs in one basket with one type of tree or one category of tree. So for example, we're planting more and more natives on campus, but we're also using species that we wouldn't even dreamed of 10 years ago. Like an example is Chinese pistache, a pistachio tree, which is, you know, you see a lot in Texas and Oklahoma, hot, dry conditions. So, and with it not being as cold in the winter, so they're going to kind of experiment, but we think it's going to do well here in the short term and the long term because it's not going to freeze out and because it's more tolerant of higher temperatures and drought, even though we're going to irrigate it. So they're just like a diversity of strategies, and I would encourage the city to think about that as well, that we don't zero in on just a strategy, that we mix strategies, beyond just mixing species, but, to try to spread the risk, and it's back to Darwin's survival of the fittest, right? And if you have more players in the game, there's more likely to be a greater percentage that's gonna adapt and survive.
You say you were planting ponderosa pine.
So is there an example that, of something more drought tolerant and heat tolerant, and cold tolerant, just more tolerant in general? Yeah, of a lot of extremes.
It's the same way with the, you know, the redwoods and the sequoias. I mean, we know those will grow here. But just like you've talked about the extremes, you can lose all your redwoods.
Yeah.
Get an extreme at the wrong time.
Hot, dry conditions, yeah.
And, just like the University of Washington, when they lost almost 100 of those things, because we had that freeze down to 0. So I think they got 8 up there. We got 0 here. And, at a certain age, they don't make it. But, they're so resilient. There's been some in town, right in Tumwater here, where they had fire next to them, burned the whole side, and the people think, well, gee, let's get rid of this tree. And hey, 2 years later, it sprouts so much, it's all green again. It's still there.
Yeah.
So there's just a number of things, and then you get into the soils, you know, the differences. Just like on the Capitol campus, there's a number of places that, you know, just, it's not very far underneath. There isn't any soil.
Over the parking garage.
Yeah, right.
You know, you're down there in the garage or something, underneath those trees. So it's just an interesting subject.
What's on the next tree giveaway event next year? Would it be possible to explore seed sources from other zones?
Or early, we can definitely start. We've been buying 1 gallon plants right now, but, and choosing a Tumwater business, but we can try to make more resilient choices, if we have enough advance notice to be able to find someone and have them ship.
And it begs the question, we've been focusing on native plants the last few years. You know, should there be a non-native drought, high temperature tolerant in the mix? I'm just posing the question on that.
Alyssa, I could give like a slight recommendation for potential like seed transfer zones, like what you can use. From my research, I at least understand that the Puget Sound as well as the, I don't know how to say these places, but Skagit, yeah, and Twin Harbors seed transfer zones, I think they're going to resemble more, would you say total? Not sure how to pronounce it. I'm not sure. Okay, Toutle. Toutle. Yes, so seed sources from Toutle, seed transfer zones are recommended to be considered for other seed zones in the Puget Sound region for reforestation and restoration purposes. In case that's interesting.
If they survive Mount St. Helens exploding, might survive here.
Definitely all the seed source.
I would love the tree boards helping to source those plants for the tree giveaway in April. We do give them away Arbor Day, so between now and then, there's your help.
You know the seed lot selection tool?
That's interesting, because most of the plants we've been buying probably come from Oregon, and it'd be interesting to know if it's an Oregon seed source or not.
You mentioned
Even our natives.
this chart, which I really can't read from here, but you said you have found data that says some species are, have more tolerance. I assume that means they have a broader, tolerance to drought and heat and cold. It seems like, you know, a big term. Is the chart broken down by precipitation versus heat versus cold?
So I think this one is generally, I based this off of the assessment, the tree species vulnerability assessment for the Puget Sound region. So what you're talking about with drought tolerant, as well as like all these other urban factors and like environmental factors that aren't just the heat zone and the heat and hardiness zone.
Yes.
Because basically it's making these estimations mostly based off of the heat and hardiness. But in the modification factors, it mentions all these other variabilities and what impacted the planted adaptability score. So it could be like suitable for heat and hardiness, but it may have a low score for planted adaptability score because it's not drought tolerant. And so these are things that are kind of, I think I have it in the legend, all these different little 3-letter abbreviations.
So if we can identify species that are highly adaptable to everything, I guess.
Yeah.
You know, that might be something that we, like ginkgo.
Box too.
Yeah, you know, maybe those are the trees that we want to encourage also.
Yeah.
The best.
But again, like I said, we don't want to put all our eggs in one basket. We want to have a diverse group
Some
of
of the
highly adaptable trees.
studies I was citing, especially with the seed zones and like seed lots, diversifying them, it did mention using these things in addition to the native trees to kind of bolster their growth and to make sure that there's still like a canopy and there are other trees that can help keep them alive in this region where they can live, but the seed lots haven't seed zones, if that makes sense.
Do you remember in your research anything suggesting that we might see, as Mike said, significant loss of native trees in the future due to climate change? Saying, you know, Doug fir or western red cedar, out of water. You're probably going to lose half of them in the next 50 years. So that might be something we,
ash borer that's in
yeah,
Oregon now.
we might want to plan on and say, you know, the budget, maybe it's not going to happen tomorrow, but in the next 20 years, we're going to lose 20% of the current canopy in Tumwater based on climate change and insects.
Yeah, when I was looking at hardiness zone, actually, like the hardiness zone changes that will occur throughout till 2099, I think there was a point that it was like once it reaches a certain degree, it will be hard for certain native species to grow. But also that part was more so for forests rather than urban forestry and street trees. That was just general Washington bioclimatic shifts. I also don't know which specific trees that would be for, but there are, I think, some tables and graphs and images in, I have the whole bibliography listed that I know you don't have time to read the whole thing. But there's some useful tables that show, you know, with the climate shifting and the way it does, trees will more so grow up north, and it won't make sense for them to be really thriving here and continuing the numbers that they are now.
And not to oversimplify things, but I'm really intrigued by your second column with your plant adaptability score, ranging from 3s to 5s. Is that kind of an aggregate of all these different factors rolled into one adaptability score? Like, could we use that as a guide for selecting this really preferred list of street trees. I'm just making this up, anything over 4.2 would be like really good to have on the street tree list, and whatever number we decide on based on the spread.
And we might want to discourage some of those that are
Below, yeah. I mean, is it safe to say the score is an aggregate of adaptability, heat, cold, drought, insect, disease? I guess I'm really curious what this adaptability score from.
Right, so I have the, paper. There is a lot that goes, into it, and I think it's scored slightly differently, but.
Well, that's a good thing if there's a lot that goes into it. It's not just one thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To do the inputs.
I don't wanna leave tonight thinking I can just look at these fives and think that's what we should be doing, is anything that's a 4.5 or greater, but maybe that could be our guide, but I don't wanna make that assumption without knowing how it's derived.
I think this is based on I'm looking at it right now, I just tried to go to, where I believe it would be. At least from what this page is saying, they relied on a scoring system called modification factors, which were those, like, you know, if they are vulnerable to disease, if they're vulnerable to drought, if they are vulnerable to ice, or if they're resistant to these things, on the other hand. And so it was using, I think, different scoring for those different factors. But they also, I don't know the exact numbers that they used for the scoring, and I don't know how much of it was just if they were suitable for heat or hardiness.
Or how it was weighted. I mean, they might have given more weight to some variables, but it's intriguing to me that maybe we could use that as a guide. And I'm just looking at these numbers really quickly, and based on my personal experience, it seems to jive with what I know are tougher. Street trees are more survivable in any more adverse conditions, so it seems to drive with one person's personal experience. That doesn't mean it's true.
Keep cars away from them too.
Oh yeah, the car vulnerability. If your SUV weighs over 4 tons, you may not survive. But
Well, you know, on your list here, you've got that Rutledge tree species vulnerability assessment.
where do you see that? Oh, on the reference list?
No, on her, list of all the stuff that she reviewed.
Okay,
I was just wondering if that was the one
that drove these numbers.
had something to do with what those numbers were.
Okay, oh,
Oh,
You know?
I don't believe so. I think that was separate as background research for,
Something else?
I think I just kind of checked between a lot of resources to make sure that this was accurate, and that I was writing all of these down in the most, like, in the best way that I could. That was not part of the vulnerability assessment, I don't think.
Okay.
It could be in the sources. I'm not sure.
I can,
It's
send
pretty
you all
thorough.
the 50-page full version of the Puget Sound. I was trying to save trees and only give you the 2-page for this one, but I can send you the full one.
electronically, yeah.
It's really interesting.
online records.
So let's see, so we kept saying we have a draft list. What are the next steps that we're gonna probably get to a final list and the time frame for that?
Figure out what happens with the WUI code, because we're trying to approach them all at the same time so that, we don't confuse people. So once the WUI is, finalized, then we'll probably start having the joint planning commission tree board meetings again. We'll bring forward these things. So this is where we left off when Amita was, doing this term of internship. There's been talk since then about, rating your results and maybe removing some of these trees, as well as not listing them alphabetically and having like a top few at the top, so that if developers are just selecting, they're not just being like, well, I'll go with these, yeah. So we'll have like a curated list that'll be first seen, and hopefully those will also include some that are more affordable for the developers, but also prioritize whatever the tree board, the planning commission want. We'll have those meetings to make sure that we get everything vetted by tree board. Planning commission has more authority. They approve, and then it goes to city council. So that'll.
Trying to back this up, a lot of this unfortunately is driven by availability by the nursery industry, which is always behind. I mean, it's not their fault, it's just because we're dealing with woody plants. It takes a long time to breed more tolerant and then get them into production. And so that's another huge variable. We might have this wonderful list, but only 3 of them are available at any quantity from the nursery. So that's what, developers are really, unfortunately, they end up with a really small list based on availability or.
Luckily, we
Yeah,
have
no,
expertise here with the
right.
landscape architect, know
Yeah.
exactly.
It doesn't matter what you specify.
Right, if it's not available, or if it's something that isn't widely grown.
Want it to be usable, well-informed, and in line with the principles from the urban forestry management plan.
Wonderful things I would have loved to know in doing research. Great.
But wait, there's always room for more research.
Anita, I'm wondering if in your research, is there a ongoing group that's continuing this research that we should key into annually?
Annually. I don't believe I know of that, but the closest thing I know to like a group keeping a page on the Puget Sound region, like street trees and urban trees, is that, again, the same place that the report came from, the tree species vulnerability assessment. I think they're still working on things that are related to that to be more specific to, I think, different regions in the Puget Sound area. I don't know if they're going to do anything more with down here in Tumwater, but.
So that's the NIACS, is that the group that,
And the forest adaptation.
both of those?
And I would assume DNR geneticist would be part of that, and we could check with the urban forestry people at DNR and say, should we be buying our street trees from Oregon rather than locally?
Although most of our
Although,
street trees
yeah,
come from Oregon.
Yeah, that's already the case.
I'm going to be more particular about the source of the trees when we buy them locally.
Right.
Find out if they're going to be adaptable and hardy to future conditions.
And right here on this page, adaptability scores were assigned using methods developed by Brandt et al.
I was just pointing down with my little finger. Thank you. So if we want to dig into where these adaptability scores came from, it's right there.
I did have just one more page just summarizing a little bit of what I had said, if you want to hear any of that, or if you feel like you're good.
No, please do.
Okay. So generally, urban trees in the Puget Sound region will be reckoning with the general effects of these novel bioclimatic conditions while facing altered ecological dynamics and changes particular to the urban environment of Tumwater. Indirect effects of the urban forest in the region may occur through the changing and increased abundance of insect pests, pathogens, and non-native invasive species, as well as the probability, severity, and extent of severe storms with urban storm runoff. These projected changes in climate and their associated impacts and vulnerabilities have important implications for urban forest management, including the planting and maintenance of street and park trees, equity and environmental justice efforts, and long-term planning from partnerships to green infrastructure. Given the longevity of trees in the landscape, future scenarios in which urban trees and forests are resilient or in decline will depend on the management and planning actions that are made today. Recommendations made from the referenced scientific articles highlight considerations policymakers and urban forestry planners can take, including incorporating the role of climate change as a driver of urban tree dieback and mortality into adaptive management practices to reduce risks and economic losses, maintenance of urban canopy cover for rainfall interception as an adaptive measure, forming adaptive management using the combination of tree inventory analyses and monitoring with forecasts of urban forest responses under different climate change and management scenarios. Collaboration between government, scientists, and the public to develop locally engaged and long-term monitoring plans. Selection of urban trees is of critical influence on the adaptability of future urban forests and street trees, particularly with the intricacies of climate change. It is vital that careful considerations be taken in regard to diversifying seed sources for restoration and reforestation of urban forests in the region, and to adapt existing plant ecotypes. Secondarily, identifying species and genotypes likely to be tolerant of future climates and promoting the planting, maintenance, and preservation of such trees through urban forestry planning and management. That's all I have.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you.
Based on what Anita's told us, is there a way in our inventory, particularly now as we're starting to identify lost trees, to analyze that data based on natural loss versus our loss? To say, you know, this year we've lost 20 Norway maples due to climate change as opposed to something else.
I wouldn't be confident saying that we're losing any individual tree because of climate change. Also, most of the ones that we're identifying as removed are due to infrastructure issues, visual screening issues, very urban, like this tree was in the way kind of thing, for visibility or cars felt it was in the way. For the natural areas, we can do that within the sample plots, and we can do that for our properties. Into the future, we can track, especially once we get that set up into our other system, so that when we do work orders on any particular tree, we can put in notes about why it might have been maintained or removed, or if it was directed by the maintenance plan. We can start to collect data on that, but I wouldn't feel confident to say that we lost maple X because of climate change, fortunately.
I think it would be helpful in the future, of course, we had some way to note whether it's by wind or drought or storm damage, that this tree, and then we could identify the species. You know, we had more tree storm damage on western hemlock than we had on western red cedar. And so that might be a reason to plant less hemlock, because it's more brittle. We can learn from this so that we can save money.
And when we set up the new system to track the trees as actual pieces of asset inventory, we can add that as a field, notes as to what's being done and why, and then pull reports.
And Jim, there's no data, but the last thing I remember in that category, because it was so widespread, were the burst trees and all the ice damage. There was so much damage, devastation, and death from ice that it was just so obvious to even lay people that maybe that's not the best tree to plant in this region, either in a street tree or other area, because it was so widespread.
Well, the Columbus Day storm.
Yeah.
You know, you look at that was a long time ago, but you can see which trees were brittle and which were not.
Yeah.
Or western red cedar slough snow. And so when we get these 12 inches of wet snow every 3 or 4 years, we can identify which species cause us the most problem, and not plant those in the future.
Thank you, Amita, for your presentation. I just want to make sure that you know that you do not have to stay here for the rest of the You're welcome to, but we won't judge you if you have to go.
Thank you for coming.
She's working on some more projects?
They're working on a project with me right now, doing those interviews with high water consumers in the residential.
Ooh, how's that going?
Right now in the data analysis part of it, you know, grounded theory using max QDA and everything to just try and figure out the deeper connections between the interviews and survey responses.
Because they're planting a lot of trees and watering them.
Were they receptive to your request for interviews generally?
Yeah, we had 3 interviews. It was really interesting, the results we got, and a lot of it has come from, I think, a couple sources that we've identified.
Anything you can share yet, or?
I mean, outdoor. That's definitely a big thing.
There's when they're finished doing their analysis, I will share the results. we have the survey results. We had a lot more people do the survey, and then select few do the interviews, and interesting. It'll be helpful to us. So another instance in which Amita's work has been helpful to the city.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening.
Don't let her graduate, just keep doing it.
I would love that. Thank you. Time to head out now. School the next day.
Good luck in school tomorrow.
Thank you.
You know, it was interesting on that ice storm, you know, in 2012.
Yeah.
And, you know, around town, you know, it hovered right about 31 degrees.
Yes.
Boy, it had dropped a couple more degrees. It would have just been totally, it was bad.
Here.
Boy, I watched the trees in my yard, man, you know, they were just at that point where it was turning into ice instead of just dripping water off. Boy.
That crackle pop.
I had a Gary Oak land on my house.
Yeah.
That's so sad for you.
At the time. So my daughter was trapped in the house.
Oh, okay.
And he three, you know, on the other side of the planet, so.
What happened to the tree?
Well, it was just the Gary Oak came down on top of my house.
Okay.
And her car was in the garage and it was blocked in, and it just raked the front of the house. It didn't break anything. I mean, it took down the gutters, but it didn't do much damage.
Gonna move on to the next item?
Yeah, let's move on. What do we got? Proposed new regulatory incentives.
So, earlier in the year, I created a memo of examples. I think it was before Brody and Hannah, or were you here for that? A lot of different examples. I can give you that memo if you want. But it was looking at, towns and cities in the Pacific Northwest and different non-regulatory incentives for private property and public property, because those are two action items to work on from the Urban Forestry Management Plan. So I put together a list, and tree board members asked me to come back later with recommendations from that list of examples. And a grant application came in between then and now, and I had to scurry and try to make a project work within some grant guidelines, which helped inform the ones that I'll be recommending, because we have 50% funding for them this time. The ask here is for y'all to discuss and make a recommendation for me to either include or not include in next biennium's budget the other 50%. The total recommended programs will cost $58,455 per year with additional staff time to administer that. That'll be me and the urban forester, who is also 50% funded by the U.S. Forest Service. The other 50% of their salary will also be included as in that next biennium budget. So it'll be about $29,000 that would need to be allocated in the city's budget per year if we move forward with these recommendations. You all know about the Urban Forestry Management Plan very well, and the fact that I brought that that list of different examples. Grant public property. So we have and maintain trees in the right-of-way. There are some, go into the recommendation. I'll make it real short. Hopefully you read this, and I'll go right to the recommendation. For public property, I recommend that we develop a subsidized street tree trimming program to assist low and moderate income Tumwater residents struggling to adequately maintain existing street trees. Income thresholds for this program and other LMI qualifying programs will be included in this memo, will be developed at a later date after stakeholder outreach. I'm also hoping to pair it with other programs related to energy to have the same thresholds. To do this, the city would solicit and hire an outside contract, ISA certified arborist, to perform maintenance and trimming on property selected for the program. That would cost about $32,000 per year. I was estimating 160 hours of trimming each year to be made available. Again, 50% of this can be covered by the U.S. Forest Service grant. In terms of private property, so I wasn't recommending any additional street tree installations for right-of-way until we get that information from the inventory for priority planting areas based on environmental justice and equity, tree canopy equity. That'll air quality, all of that will be put together for potential planting areas, and that I would make recommendations for public property plantings from there. more information, then I'll suggest that. With the information we have, I suggest that both can happen. For private property, two different ones, one for retaining existing trees and one for planting more trees. So for planting more trees, I'm recommending that we continue with our Arbor Day tree giveaway, but that we do an additional one that is more targeted to areas that have lower canopy or to low and moderate income areas. So with census block groups with a tree equity score of 84 or less, census tracts with an environmental health disparity score of 8 or higher, of which there's 1 in the city, or areas identified in the Tumwater Tree Inventory as priority planting areas, like what I was just talking about. Some of those planting areas that they identify in the inventory may be in private properties. We would have them as top of the list for who gets this. I'm suggesting 60% of whatever funding is allocated for this program be retained for addresses that fall into the categories above, so those areas that have less trees need more trees. And to reach out to those residents and property owners, we would do a door hanger or an annual mailing to encourage their participation, let them know that there's a special tree giveaway and that it wouldn't be just trees. Trees, watering bags, compost, and mulch. That's common in other jurisdictions, and as long as I get legal okay that that's not a gift of public funds, that's how I would like to go forward. So people would apply for the program, they would attend a pre-recorded tree care webinar or an annual in-person planting care workshop, so they would know that we would at least provide them education on how to plant the tree. We would distribute the trees in that in-person planting care workshop, as well as the supporting things, and they would need to sign a tree care pledge, which may or may not include ability for staff to visit that property in the years to come. We would, again, need to get that vetted by our legal department. If someone needs help planting or bringing the tree home because of accessibility issues, we would provide assistance for that. Want to make sure that everyone has access to trees. And I'm estimating that we would give 100 trees per year through this program. Again, 50% of the funding is available. We wouldn't be giving these out to apartments because we want them to be in soil in the ground. But that would be for ADUs, single-family houses, duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes.
So the houses, or the areas that have the low score or whatever, don't have a lot of trees, are those primarily rentals, or are they just...
By census tract, so it's vast areas that do contain rentals, and some of them are multifamily. I can pull up the environmental health disparities map and the tree equity score map visually.
Why not? What were you using?
Where does, what power does the city have to decide exactly where the tree is planted?
For the, we would get the application and we would cross-reference it with the things that would be prioritized, give those out, and if we've filled up the prioritized ones, whoever else would be getting them. But
Are you thinking about on your property, like?
So they're not planting it next
right on
to
top
a
of
fire
the,
hydrant,
yeah.
on top of electric, or underneath utility.
That would be part of the training and the in-person workshop. That would be, these are best practices so that you're not planting under lines on top of things that you don't want to be breaking. We could give number of feet or inches recommendations for where they would be planting, and they would not be able to plant any of those that we're giving them in right-of-way without city approval. We want it to be on their property and not in right-of-way, because that's a whole maintenance thing that's confusing. Sorry?
That's from an approved list.
Yeah. Environmental health disparities map. Have any of you seen this before? I imagine Brody has. Okay. So,
wasn't there any reference to this in the urban forest management plan?
no, this was made after.
This map is really new.
It was my very first bookmark when I started, and it was brand new when I started. So this is the census tract of Tumwater that has the 8 in environmental health disparities. So we would prioritize this neighborhood, and I will also pull up tree pick.
Capital would be to Little Rock Road, isn't it? Between,
Is that Black Lake? Oh,
Barnes Lake, I think that's Prosper Lake.
wasn't that mostly like Costco?
Commercial.
Yeah.
Yes, my question is, the way that this, recommendation is written, that 60% of funding would go to this. I think I would recommend
rewording to up to 60%. What if you don't have enough applicants to fill your 60%?
My thought was that we would not give away 100 trees that year, and we would give an equal number to people that fall within that category and people who don't, but we can change that.
It wouldn't be possible if you fell short to carry over funding for the next round?
We could do that within a biennium,
Okay.
but not, yeah, it's hard to roll over money in local government.
Oh, boy.
Really?
So,
Spend it or lose it.
although if it's being funded potentially from the tree fund and we move over a certain amount with city council approval, then it would be easier to, there's details that we need to figure out. This is just really high level, go, no go. This is the tree equity score map. This is from American Forest. So anything with a more orange color is an area with a lower tree equity score, and that's related to environmental justice measures as well as the tree canopy in those areas.
At the airport, isn't it?
Which you'll find is interesting. The environmental health disparities area, as highest has 100. So it's conflicting in that way, but I was trying to figure out a way that we could have multiple data sources that would be publicly accessible for people to maybe even vet themselves or not.
Not like you're just weighting one higher than the other.
They're all available, just trying to have as many options for us to improve the tree canopy equity. And yeah, the airport has a 71, that's the lowest. There's 77. So I had recommended in here that it would be tree equity score of 84 or less. So it's pretty high still. We are still Western Washington. Florida has really low scores.
Alyssa, how does natural prairies fit into the tree equity score?
That's a very good question. Probably showing lower tree canopy as part of it.
Natural.
Yes, in geologic time, yes.
So
these here-
are sites that are not real conducive to trees.
Yes, and we can add some complexity to any tree giveaway program to maybe have some prairie species. That's going to be complicated, but we could dream it up and make it happen. So this is what goes into the tree equity score, all of these different measures. So health burden index, linguistic isolation, children, seniors, people of color, unemployment, people in poverty, heat disparity, as well as the current tree canopy cover and a tree canopy cover goal, which isn't necessarily always ours.
So if there's never been trees there, it would have a low equity score.
It would have a low canopy cover score, but the other things are related to socioeconomics.
Okay.
There's longstanding correlation between low tree canopy and areas with a higher concentration of people of color, poor and working class people, so on and so forth.
The soil is bad for trees.
It's
rocks.
redlining and other political.
Well, then we have to consider the gold,
Yeah.
because the
So
gold
it's sounding
is
like
not trees.
this program is not a winner.
Yeah, I
Which
know.
is fine. We don't have to do it. All of these are suggestions.
No, we need to plant trees, that's the bottom line.
Yeah.
Just figure out where it makes the most sense and what's politically advantageous.
So the 50% match is tied to environmental justice and equity. So if we don't point it in that direction, we would not have a 50% match.
And, you know,
Which is not only for that, it's for good reason too, but that's,
we'll learn a lot. I think it's not like a pilot, you know, the first time we're doing it, so we'll find out what works and doesn't work.
in the city of Tacoma, they have a program similar to this for their tree giveaway program where they also have the 60% and they have their own equity map that they created, that they use instead of these third-party tools. And they prioritize planting in those areas, which we could probably need a consultant to help create an index like that. We could do that with some money for a consultant, to make that more finer tuned, or we could figure out a way together, to account for the complexities of prairies and environmental equity and so on and so forth.
Oh, and street trees too, isn't it?
They have a street tree program too. Yeah, they have so many programs. So sounds like this one needs some modification before it has a blessing, and that's fine.
Don't scrap.
Okay, I won't scrap it. And then the retaining existing trees, this isn't an example, this is my best try. There were no examples except for heritage trees in the state of Hawaii, that I came across. And that was a tax write-off, for a tax that we don't pay here. So retaining existing trees, when we have the urban forester, I would like part of their job description to give tree assessments to up to 50 people a year that are income qualified. That could be irrespective of any removal permit. That would be ideal. If there's a tree that's freaking someone out on their property and they're thinking about removing it either through a permit process or outside of a permit process, to give them the information to make better decisions. A lot of people are apparently afraid of trees on their property and they don't want to have them at all, but once they have information that might make them feel like it's not treacherous, or if it just needs mild trimming and doesn't need to come down all the way, that's my best thought of how we can help people retain trees.
How would you identify those people that would be receiving the health assessment?
So they would be applying to the city, and we would want to do targeted outreach to, well, just outreach in general to people, letting them know that this is available to people with low and moderate income.
We already have a permitting requirement that if they want to remove 6 or more trees, they have to get a permit. So I would assume that if they submit one of those permits, we already get approval, so I would think we would have someone go there and of course say, you know, we really recommend that you not, biologically, if it makes sense that they're not hazard trees or whatever. But there's no real incentive if they legally have the right to remove those trees, right? We can't say, no, you can't, or we'll fine you.
Under the hopeful future version of the tree and vegetation ordinance, they'd have to keep a certain number of tree credits, and even calculating that could be hard for someone. That would be helpful to have this as kind of a safety net. And this is also trying to approach people who would be removing things without knowing that there's a permit process, or totally knowing there is a permit process and going around that.
Yeah.
Which isn't to say that they would be like, let me sign up for the city to do this program at the same time. There were no examples of this, so this is me dreaming and putting it on paper and asking.
I've had neighbors who moved from Arizona, you know, and said, we want to live here because our kids live here, and so we got to get rid of all these trees because we don't like trees. They, you know, buy the property and they import it, and they just cut the trees, and it looks like Arizona. So, that may be hard to convince.
I don't expect 100% perfection in the implementation of any of these. There will be struggles, and we'll figure out lessons learned and make it better, but first shot.
On the previously you talked about maintenance, and the city doing some of that. Is there a link, or do you know what the utilities are doing with their tree maintenance?
Yeah.
Whatever they want.
They do whatever they want.
There's no reason for the city to do it if utilities are gonna do it.
So I know that it's,
Maybe we work, I don't know, we could work.
we could see if that, we could work with the utility and see if their contractor might be our contractor, and that would, I don't know if they would do that. I've heard some stories, just from other staff that are having a really hard time getting anyone to come out and trim their trees that are anywhere near lines.
Well, yeah, that's,
Even the
That's
utility contractors won't do
we
it.
have that trouble in the county.
Yeah.
Leave the trees, let them blow down.
The maintenance is intended for street trees. That's not to say that it's not gonna be underlined, so we have to navigate that when we do the request for proposals for the contractor, if that's what we end up doing. We were given this grant. We were awarded this grant. It will be passed through from the federal government through the River Network, a nonprofit. And there is some interesting things to get through regarding that whole pass-through approach. If you want me to get into the details of that, I can. If not, be grateful that you don't have to. figure that out.
Curious if you have a sense for what the council's appetite is for matching these funds.
I know that many of the council members really love trees. We did just lose one big tree lover, in the election. They didn't run for reelection. I'm not sure if I know the council's appetite for any given thing. I just keep asking for what I know is best. Or what the tree board tells me is
It's gonna make a
best.
difference on what the definition of this stuff in March. Really.
Yes,
And how that turns out.
and our budget requests for staff will start in about March. So hopefully we have a clear picture of that, but, just to start the conversation now, you don't have to say, Alyssa, move this forward. You can say, let's talk about this again in March, once we know more about the WUI and our codes and where those are gonna go. You all just asked me to do this before the end of the year, so here it is.
Okay.
Well, good job getting the grant, that's huge.
I hope we can use it.
Yeah.
So would you like to discuss this again in March?
Oh, yeah.
Can I get a motion for the record for that, please?
Okay, we will, let's make a motion to,
Table the inclusion of these recommendations into the budget until March. Seconded.
all in favor?
All right.
Aye. Okay, no opposed? All right, motion carries. We will table it until March.
What's the last item on
Jim, where's our heritage tree nomination to vote on?
Yeah, what the heck?
I wonder if the website's broken.
Yeah. Work on that.
So I'll just give you a little dig. We appreciate you doing all the ones you've done so far.
You're definitely, that action in the urban forestry management plan to add more heritage trees, you are doing it.
You got a big.
Collectively, you're doing it.
Anyone's can do it.
Did you ever get a closure on the one at Panda,
Yes.
or the two?
Yeah, the property owner refused to permit them to become heritage trees. They wanted the flexibility, and they've sensed, I guess, that if they were heritage trees, it would be more difficult for them to.
They know they'll be run out of town if they cut them down.
Well, I hope so.
Staff also reminded them that those are a protected species within Washington State, so there would be limitations and hoops that they would have to go through to do anything to those trees to begin with.
See why they would not, because that little strip of property is unusable for anything except maybe adding a lane of Prosper Road, which I don't think is gonna happen.
That's the city.
Yeah.
I-
That would be moving Penn Express, they have to
Yeah.
take out those businesses, so I don't know why they refused, but that's their right.
City staff knows about the heritage tree map and where to get the data, and it's linked into the permitting staff now so that they know to check that, as well as the engineering department from top down. They know to check that before they make any decisions.
Well, good job getting the closure. I mean, that's worth something,
Yeah.
to know.
The inventory that is being done, are we gonna have the opportunity to see that data sometime? How, when?
So those of you who have Tree Keeper access, you can log in and click around. I can give Tree Keeper access to anyone else here,
I mean,
an Excel form.
show me where all the Gary Oaks are.
I can, now that they've completed their part, it won't include those unclassified, street trees that we're trying to figure out. But I could download that and you can sort it.
And, with the urban forest management plan, we had a pie chart showing, how many of which species. Is this gonna be incorporated into that data, so we'll have it updated?
It's not part of their, maintenance and, maintenance plan document that they'll put together, but it's our data and we can fiddle with it whenever we so please. Any analysis that we could do, if we need to do different pivot tables to figure out stuff even further.
Well, I think we talked about, what we're gonna update the urban forest management plan every 10 years, 5 years. And at that point, I assume you're collecting all the data and updating all of those charts. Right now, we know the data isn't 100% accurate. We know it's probably not 80% accurate. Yet now we have new data that could be added. We'd have a better perspective as to what we've got. Are we gonna do that analysis now that we've got this another chunk of data?
We certainly can, and it was my intention with that grant to have someone more skilled at forestry than I lead that. So my vision was that we would be setting up the urban forester with all of the data, and that they would take it and run and do all the things that make sense in that field that I am unaware of.
Okay, 12/11/2023. A motion to adjourn this meeting. Everybody in favor? Aye. All right. Meeting adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And can we help you reset?
You're welcome to if you want, but it is not expected.
I used to.
The last 2 or 3 years, noticeable since we've had that real hot summer.